All right, good morning. I think we're ready to get started. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning. Um, if you are interested, we'd love to see your faces on camera. If not, that is certainly okay. Um, we're going to start, by introducing ourselves, but I also just wanted to let you know that you're welcome to put questions in the chat at any time in the presentation. We are going to set aside time at the end for questions, but we will continue to monitor the chat, and if we can answer as we go along, we are more than happy to. So my name is Marie Tagliaferri, and I'm the special education supervisor for our alternate learning outcomes, services, and supports. And I'm going to introduce my co-presenter, Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy, or you'll see me on the screen as Kathleen Greenberg. I work with Anne-Marie in the Office for Alternate Learning Outcomes and support students and teachers and families of pursuing alternate learning outcomes and in the decision-making process. And I'm also the inclusion coach for Montgomery County Public Schools, working with the TIES Center.
We also have here this morning Megan Sullivan. She is also an itinerant resource teacher on our team. She will be supporting us technologically and also helping us monitor the chat. So thanks for being with us today, Megan. So our outcomes today they will stray a bit from what the description in the program. Kathy and I were able to attend yesterday a meeting at the state where we really spent a lot of time talking about these alternate achievement standards and what they mean for our classrooms. So we're always excited to talk about this, but we feel extra invigorated based on our conversations yesterday with a lot of our other county partners and other family stakeholders. So our outcomes today, we're going to first just explain the basic components of the alternate education framework in Maryland. We're going to identify the process for determining eligibility for that alternate education framework. We want you to be able to participate actively and meaningfully in IEP discussions when determining eligibility for alternate learning outcomes through the Appendix A and C, which is the model parent consent form. So we're going to spend some time going through that. And then we're also going to talk about how the alternate achievement standards relate to the general education standards. So what is the alternate learning framework? They're alternate learning achievement standards that are aligned to the grade level standards through curriculum modifications and specially designed instruction through instructional strategies that are outlined in the IEP. The alternate learning framework, we know, is one of the most important recommendations an IEP team can make about a student's education and their future. Going through these tools and the conversations that we're going to have today, we want to emphasize that we understand that the decision to potentially set a student on a path that will not prepare he or she for a high school diploma is significant. So because of these decisions, MSDE has really spent a lot of time creating these different, like I said, the Appendix A, also making sure that we have the parental consent in moving forward. And I think it's important to spend a little bit more time in depth on these. You should be going through them at every single IEP meeting, but as we know, there's a lot of information shared at IEP meetings. And so this is going to be a time where we can take a deeper dive into these documents and what they mean. So the alternate education framework, this is an infographic that's been around for a while at the state that really outlines what it's fully encompassing. Within it, we're looking at curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and they're interdependent and aligned to our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities that participate in this instruction. So in this model, we know that our curriculum informs our instruction informs our assessment, and all of these items are really interconnected. At the base of this framework is what we refer to as communicative competence. And there we're really looking at a set of behaviors that students must develop to communicate what they know and get their ideas met. We know that communication is much more than talking, and that it's really a basic human right and an essential building block for the development of language. And the development of this communication system allows for participation and teaching and learning that can really facilitate meaningful community and school engagement. I saw a parent, I just allowed this parent in a few moments ago, and she really has illustrated to me throughout the past 2 years the importance of that communicative competence. I think she knows who I'm referring to, but we have someone on here who has really truly advocated for her child's communication needs to be met, and she has brought in all of the right stakeholders. She has really set the highest standard for her child. And what we are seeing now in terms of his communication and his ability to access is huge and instrumental. So this is definitely a piece that we need to collaborate with our families on. We need to listen to our families, and the communication is an area where it's going to thread through this entire framework. I see that there is a raised hand. Is there a question that you'd like to ask now or put in the chat?
Yeah, this is regarding the previous slide. Hi.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Hi, good morning. I'm Deepika. Oh, the previous framework, when you're referring to the alternative learning frameworks, you said non-diploma, right? Which means certificate programs.
The students who are working through the alternate framework are not working towards a diploma, and we are going to talk about that and lay it out.
Okay.
We're going to break it down.
Okay. So my question is, if it is certificate-based programs, what are the programs that fall under this alternative? There are various programs, right? So what are the programs which fall under this?
We're going to get to that. So I don't want to put you off, but we are going to talk about how truly we're looking at a set of services and not necessarily a specific program, though we do have certain programs and classrooms in our county that do, cater to this specifically. So we will break that down in a few slides.
Sure, I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay. So you can stay on this one for one more second. Again, so these three main areas, the instruction, curriculum, and assessment that are being held up by the communication are really, again, held up by these college, career, and community, skills. That's where all of our work falls under. We want to prepare our students for their post-secondary life. When they leave us at 18 or at 21, we want them to be ready. You can go to the next slide. So as the last question sort of alluded to, there are these two different tracks. We do have the diploma versus the certificate. And a Maryland high school diploma, you earn 22 credits. You have to pass the state assessments and complete the student service learning hours. And you can see that all of this, all the criteria for the diploma happens only in high school, and in some cases in middle school. Elementary schools are not in a position to confer credits, administer these assessments, or confirm SSL hours. So we understand that this is a conversation that we start having in elementary school, and we start having it for a couple of reasons. One, because we want our families to know that if a child starts working within the alternate framework, as they continue on in their school career, they're not having the full access to the depth and breadth of the curriculum as they would in a diploma-bound framework. And Kathy will talk about this in a little bit. So it does mean that when a student is in elementary school, it's certainly appropriate, for teams to check diploma on the IEP, but we do need to make sure that, there's a complete understanding that that may end up changing as the child progresses through school. And that is why this decision is made every year, and you'll at every single IEP meeting. And one of the ways that we make sure that the whole team understands this is through these different tools. You can go to the next slide. Go ahead. So there's, three main areas in the IEP that are addressing this. The first is the participation planning. The next is the Appendix A, and the third is the parental consent. So here's a screenshot of an IEP. And this is references the student participation. And here we're really looking at the participation on district and statewide assessments. You also have your graduation information here. So there's these two boxes. The first one is blue. We're looking at if a student should participate in alternate assessments that are based on alternate achievement standards. And the second is when you determine when they're instructed on those alternate standards, that if continued, they would not be earning credits towards a Maryland high school diploma. And so teams cannot make checks in these boxes until we've gone through these next two items. So the first is Appendix A. And Appendix A is a tool that outlines the steps the IEP team must take when they're determining alternate standards and assessments for a student, and if they're appropriate. At the end of this process, each team member signs whether they agree or disagree. And if an individual disagrees with the team decision, they can certainly document it. A couple important things about this form that I want you to really understand as parents, that this form is not asking for permission or consent to alternate instruction and assessments. It is also not determining placement. It is only determining if the student is eligible for instruction and assessment. We'll talk about in a couple of slides, the place where a parent or family member can agree or disagree, but this tool is not for that. It's just to determine whether or not they're eligible. So as I said, as we go through this tool, you'll find it here on the IEP. After you've gone through the Appendix A, the IEP chair, case manager would check yes or no and have the dates of the written consent. So breaking down the Appendix A a little further, the first portion that is extremely, like I said, important for all of our team members to understand is this parent and guardian understanding. Again, this is not where you are saying that you agree or disagree. You're just saying that you understood that we've had this conversation. So the first is that if your child continues to participate in the alternate standards, he or she would be progressing towards a Maryland certificate of completion. And his or her continued participation in the alternate assessments and standards will not prepare him or her to meet Maryland's high school diploma requirements. And then the second is initially that you understand that we're going to have this conversation as an IEP team at every annual review. The first question in Appendix A is surrounding if the student has an IEP that's designed or that's set up with specifically designed instruction with substantial supports. And I decided that we would start instead at the second question because many of our students, they may meet that part of the requirement. This other piece is, does the child have a significant cognitive disability and one that impacts intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior and is pervasive across all areas? So when a team is considering whether a child has a significant cognitive disability, there's a couple things that we need to consider. The first is that there's no cutoff IQ score. So we don't say that, if you are below 70, you have a significant cognitive disability. We look at multiple sources of data. We're going to look at, as you'll see illustrated later on, our cognitive scores, educational scores, adaptive scores, student work samples, informal assessment data, and many other items to really hold the team accountable, and making sure that we're really looking at a student who has the most significant cognitive disability. And it has to be profound and complex, that's pervasive across all content areas. So not just academics or not just independent functioning. It has to be across independent, community living, leisure, vocational activities. And the accommodations and modifications make how the student communicates or responds to the environment and learn look considerably different from those characteristics of students without disabilities. The intellectual functioning is well below and exists concurrently with impairment or deficits in adaptive functioning. In terms of the adaptive functioning, we're really looking at what is essential for someone to live independently and function safely in daily life. There's typically 3 basic skill sets: conceptual skills, which are reading, numbers, time, money, communication; social skills, understanding social rules and customs; and practical life skills like feeding, dressing, bathing, and navigation. And really, we're looking at both the parent or family input of that and the teacher's input of the adaptive skills. And the third question on the Appendix A is looking at the student's content. So learning content. So this question is saying the student is learning content derived from the Maryland Career and College Readiness Standards and English Language Arts and Next Generation Science, with grade level curriculum significantly modified in order to access knowledge and skills that allow the student to make progress. This is a question that when I'm in many meetings, the teams, maybe move through, fairly quickly, because they're like, oh yeah, we do this. Well, we really want to show you how we do this. And that's where Kathy's going to take you in the next portion of this presentation. Once a team has gone through, and again, I didn't put up the entire tool, I can certainly put a copy into the slide deck so that you can reference it, but they then, like I said, put it in these 2 areas of the participation page in the IEP. Next slide. A truly critical portion of this is our model parental consent. So after a team has gone through the Appendix A, and if the team has determined that the student is eligible, they can't move forward with anything until you, the parent, has granted consent. So, and you do have the option of consenting to one item and not the other. You'll see, I know it's it's kind of small on this. I apologize, it's not bigger. But an IEP team can recommend that the student is instructed if they've been determined eligible using alternate standards. And then the second is that they may propose that a child is assessed. Again, we have to have already gone through and found them eligible through Appendix A. The second portion of this model parental consent form has space for the parent and or guardian to initial and sign whether they agree or disagree with one or both of these. That decision is also going to be documented in the prior written notice. This form and discussion, and this is in big bold, are not asking for consent to placement. The form and discussion are only about the instruction and assessment, not a particular special education program. The discussion regarding the placement happens separately when you get to the LRE page. And I think that's very important. We're looking, I know we had the question in the beginning about what programs this may be available. Well, really a child who's accessing alternate learning outcomes can be instructed in any setting. And that this tool is to really think about what that instruction looks like and how they are assessed, not where. And Kathy's going to help break that down a little more.
Okay, hi. So now I'm just going to take a minute to take a closer look at the alternate achievement standards and the instruction that goes along with them. Just to define them, an alternate achievement standard sets the expectation of performance that differs in complexity from a connected grade level achievement standard. In the interest of time, we're going to skip this video for now, but you will have access to the slides and you can watch this on your own. If we have time at the end, after questions, we can take a look at it. But this just breaks down standards-based instruction for students with significant cognitive disabilities. It is put out by the TIES Center, which I mentioned earlier. Montgomery County Public Schools, the state of Maryland, and Carroll County Public Schools have been working with the TIES Center for the past 4 years on building the capacity for district schools and classroom teachers to be able to instruct students with significant cognitive disabilities in the general education setting. And part of this discussion around alternate achievement standards has been a big part of that. So this breaks it down more. Their website has a whole robust group of resources for parents, teachers, schools on this topic. So I suggest that you go ahead and check it out. There are some resources, specific resources that may be helpful that are linked at the end of this presentation. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what are alternate achievement standards? The alternate assessment that the state of Maryland uses is called the Dynamic Learning Maps Assessment. We use the end of the year summative assessment. The Dynamic Learning Maps alternate assessment system is a system that's designed to more validly measure where students with significant cognitive disabilities, what they know and what they can do. And it's designed also to map students' learning throughout the year to achieve those outcomes. It is not a separate set of standards. It's derived from the standards from the general education students that the general education students would pursue. General education students are pursuing the outcomes and take the MCAP, which is the standard assessment in our system. And with the dynamic learning assessment, students learn something called essential elements. And those are specific statements of content and skills linked to the college and career readiness standards, which are the standards that we use in the state of Maryland for all students. And then the essential elements provide the links between the college and career readiness standards and grade specific expectations. So they are links to the standards. They are a set of standards within each discipline, reading, writing, and math, that the experts in those fields have determined are the most essential. And then basically they back map skills to achieve that standard, which would then lead to the grade level standards. So they are all connected. Okay, next slide. The alternate achievement standards are not an alternate ALO curriculum, and that's one thing we really want people to understand. I'm not sure this slide had a chart in it. Do we have another slide? There we go. Thank you. So this is just an example of what the college and career standards look like. The general ed standards on the left, these are third grade standards, and then what the coordinating essential element would look like. So for example, in reading, the RI is informational text, and this is third grade, and this is the first standard. So that's what the coding on the end looks like. And you'll notice that the coding for the essential element is the same, so that teachers can look at the general ed standard and the essential element, which is linked to it. So when asking and answering question to demonstrate understanding of a text and referring explicitly to the text as the basis for the answers, the coordinating essential element would be answer who and what questions to demonstrate understanding of details in a text. And for all the general ed content standards, there is a linking essential element. The design being that you could work within a general education framework, but hone in and tailor individualized instruction to meet that essential element. But because they are connected, we can have participation in the general education curriculum. Okay, so when it comes to planning for alternate learning outcomes, due to the individual nature of special education and individualized education programs, we start always with the grade level standards, and we consider all students, general education students first, receiving individualized instruction and supports as needed. Then we move to on the top right to identify the alternate standards. So once we know what the general ed standard is, we look and see what is the coordinating alternate standard, which is really going to hone into the big ideas or the essential element of that grade level standard. And then we look for acceptable evidence of learning an alternative standard. So what are we going to ask students to do, and what will be the product of that instruction, so that we can determine if a student is acquiring the skill that is outlined in the alternate standard. If a student were to achieve those alternate standards, we have kind of an extension standard that goes along with that. And our goal is always to be working towards grade level standards, knowing that students with significant cognitive disabilities will be doing that in maybe possibly a different way and at a different rate than their general education peers. And then we plan, once we know what students, what we want them to know and to be able to do, then we look at the resources that we can use to plan the lessons and the materials to achieve that outcome. We have many resources that teachers can use to access with modified or adapted materials, and increasingly making sure that those are embedded in our general education curriculum materials as well. Okay, so this is breaking down the standard even further. We use in our elementary math, we use Eureka Math. So this is an example from the Eureka Math module 1. And the main idea or the topic for that is place value. So we've got our place value and rounding and algorithms for addition and subtraction. The Common Core standard for that, or the general education standard for that, you can see outlined in detail there. I'm just going to go over the top one so you can see how they link together. But it's to solve multi-step word problems with whole numbers, whole number answers using 4 operations, including problems in which remainders must be interpreted, represent the problems using the equations with a letter standing for the unknown quality, and assessing the reasonableness of answers. The essential element for that is to solve one step, real world problems using addition or subtraction. So now we're limiting this to one step. We are making sure that there is a real world connection, and we are using adding and subtracting at this time with our 3rd grade students across all ability levels. Then that standard or that element is broken down into what are called linkage levels, and that might be a developmental progression that would lead ultimately to the essential elements target level, a successor level, and then if a student achieves those, then we're moving towards the general education outcome. So in this case, the initial precursor level would be combining sets and partitioning sets. Then the next level would be distal precursor, demonstrate the concept of addition, demonstrate the concept of subtraction. Then the next level would be to go to the proximal precursor, which would be to determine the unknown in an addition equation and determine the unknown in a subtraction equation, with the target level being to solve subtraction word problems within 100 and solve addition word problems within 100. And then the successor level would be to solve 2-step addition and subtraction word problems for students. So this really helps teachers to be able to back map a skill, determine where an individual student is in that progression, and to target instruction for the appropriate level that would lead to mastery, and then mastery of the next level until we reach the target and successor levels. These linkage levels might be something that would be turned into objectives in the IEP for students. And so that's how teachers might use this to inform instruction. Okay, next. So I guess there's two cautions here that we really want to have parents understand, and that is that the decision about which assessment the student takes, and therefore how they're instructed towards the appropriate standards, is separate from the decision about where the student is educated in placement, which Anne-Marie mentioned earlier. And that it does not automatically mean that the student goes to a separate setting from that of his or her same age peers without disabilities. And regardless of eligibility for and participation in the alternate framework, all students are general education students first, and are entitled to instruction in the least restrictive environment, which for many students is a general education class in the home school. But there are students for whom a separate special education setting along the continuum of services is appropriate. When making this decision, the guiding principle for us is the least dangerous assumption, and that so that we can really empower students and not limit them based on maybe manifestations of their disability, which might make it more difficult for them to demonstrate their skills and knowledge and their learning. So there's three principles that guide us in that everyone has abilities and talents, and no two people are exactly alike. That you can't judge a person's whole future success based on one source of data, like an IQ score. And there's way more to a person than just one test score. And that people learn best when they feel valued and when they have some sort of meaning to their life. So that is our goal for students. So we want to assume that students have capacity rather than not, and that whatever option is put in place is going to restrict students in the least possible way. And when we don't have enough evidence to make that judgment or an assessment about a student's performance or abilities, that we assume that they can do whatever it is we're asking them to do, and not the alternative, which is that they are not. So we want to give them the benefit of any doubt and assume competence. Okay, and then the next screen. So curriculum resources that we use that I mentioned earlier in our general education curriculum for elementary math, it's the Eureka. For reading and language arts, currently it's Benchmark. StudySync is the English language arts in the middle school. For the upper grades, and LearnZillion is the math program. So all teachers are trained in all of these, including teachers who teach students on the alternate framework in a variety of settings for them, with additional training on how to instruct and make materials accessible for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And so we have different programs and resources that we use for students pursuing the alternate learning outcomes. For example, unique learning systems, materials from the Attainment Company, Readtopia, which is something that we are adding to our supports, and the unique learning systems. We don't use any of these as our complete and total reading curriculum because our curriculum is derived from the general education curriculum. These materials supplement that instruction and provide teachers with some alternative materials that are already adapted for students and given a specific population that they're teaching. Okay. So some specific information, just to sum up, that curriculum informs instruction, instruction drives assessment, the assessments inform the teams of student progress toward grade level standards and age expectations, and the IEP brings it all together and provides the blueprint for the specifically designed instruction that meets the student's individual needs. So all of these the decisions that we make at the IEP meeting, our decision around alternate learning outcomes, all works together and is captured in that IEP. So we have a blueprint or an action plan for students' education for the given year. Okay, we mentioned resources. So this is your resources page. We have MSDE guidance that's been put out for developing IEPs for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, and includes information about Appendix A. Montgomery County's public schools process for determining eligibility for instruction and assessment on alternate standards. The DLM refers to the dynamic learning maps mentioned before. There are many parent resources there as well. But this one gives more information about who are the students with the most significant cognitive disabilities that we are considering for the alternate achievement standards. And then 2 resources that are specifically from the TIES Center. The general education curriculum is not an alternate curriculum. So that goes into, that's specifically designed for parents. And it goes through this process a little bit more with an inclusion lens. And then also taking the alternate assessment does not mean mean education in a separate setting. So we're taking it from not being an alternate curriculum to not being an alternate setting. And the goal of the TIES Center is to include students with significant cognitive disabilities in general education communities as much as possible. So that's the lens that you'll see there. I think we have.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And now we have a couple of minutes. If people would like to ask questions, I do see this first one. Does the elementary autism program fall under the alternate achievement standard? And yes, it does. The classic autism program works with students who are accessing the alternate learning achievement standards. I'm also going to, just as you were talking, I'm going to put my contact information and Kathy's contact information into the chat, so that if you have questions that come up later, you're more than welcome to send us an email.
Anne Marie, I'm also going to put the evaluation in the chat so people can fill that out if they don't have any questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure, that's great. Thanks, Megan. Are there any other questions or thoughts, concerns, or ideas that anyone would like to share? So slide 23 is referencing the specially designed and modified adapted resources. So again, these are resources. These are not curriculums. Teachers can use these to supplement their instruction. All of them are aligned to our Common Core standards. But they are not a full curriculum. They're used to supplement. We think it's important to share with you because you also may receive, or you may, get home, work samples that reference these. And I apologize if you can hear a lawnmower in the background. I see the question, can you receive a diploma in any of the ALO programs? So at this point you cannot, because what has happened in these ALO programs, the students are not accessing the entire depth and breadth of the curriculum. So they are not, as every year goes on, they're not building to where they would necessarily need to be when they start earning credits at the high school level. But the decision to look at whether a student is diploma bound or not is made every single year. So it certainly can be something that you can explore with your IEP team. The question is curriculum 2.0 used for all under ALO? So now we're really referring to it. These are the Common Core state standards, and those are the standards that our alternate achievement standards are derived from, as Kathy illustrated. And I think it's very clearly illustrated in what, like I said, you'll have access to these slides where it breaks down the Common Core to the essential, to the linkages. If there are no other questions at this time, we just truly want to thank you for spending time with us this morning. This support team for alternate achievement standards is, I don't want to say newly developed because the work has been going on, but we do have really a dedicated team that is working on this. That includes myself and Kathy and Megan and a few other individuals. And so, we're very committed to working with students with significant cognitive disabilities. We certainly would appreciate any, parent and or family feedback and input. So feel free to, send anything to me, or if you'd like to set up a separate time to meet, I'd be happy to do so. If you wouldn't mind, please fill out the survey that's in the chat. We hope that you enjoy your next session, and please stay in touch.